Picture a world before America, before the name even existed, the late 15th century. A time of kings, explorers, and maps that held the secrets to fortunes. Europe was bursting at the seams, hungry for wealth, knowledge, and power. The spices of the East, pepper, cinnamon, silk, and gold, were more valuable than empires. But there was a problem, a huge one. The ancient Silk Road, the lifeline to these treasures, had been severed. When Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire in 1453, the gateway to Asia slammed shut. Europe was cut off, desperate for a new way to reach the East. Portugal made the first move. Led by the visionary Prince Henry the Navigator, their sailors bravely hugged the coasts of Africa, inching their way south, seeking a path around the continent. Every voyage was a leap into the unknown, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. New tools like the compass, the astrolabe, and the nimble caravel ship turned the terrifying ocean into a new frontier. But while Portugal looked south, one man from Genoa, Italy, looked west. A man with a dream so audacious it wasn't on any map. His name was Christopher Columbus. Born to a family of humble wool weavers, Columbus wasn't interested in the loom. He was captivated by the sea. He devoured maps, studied the stars, and read Marco Polo's accounts of faraway lands and unbelievable riches. While most sailors feared the vast, empty Atlantic, Columbus had a radical idea. He became convinced the Earth was much smaller than anyone believed. He theorized that by sailing west, he could reach the spice-rich Indies faster than anyone sailing east. It was a vision that bordered on madness. For years, he was a wanderer, drifting through the royal courts of Europe, map in hand, begging for a sponsor. Portugal said no. England dismissed him. Scholars and experts openly mocked his calculations, calling his plan a fool's errand. But Columbus's belief was unshakable. He never gave up. And then, his fortunes changed. In Spain, two powerful monarchs, Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon, had just unified their kingdom. Fresh off a historic victory, they were eager to expand their influence and their empire beyond the horizon. Columbus saw his chance. He stood before the Spanish royal court and made his pitch, a daring voyage westward across the Atlantic to reach the Indies. It was a bold, almost reckless request. Most advisors thought he would sail off the edge of the world. But Queen Isabella saw something different. She saw faith. She saw courage. She saw destiny. In the spring of 1492, she made a decision that would change the world forever. Spain would fund the voyage. Columbus would be given 3 ships, a crew, and a promise. The flag of Castile and Aragon would fly over new lands, wherever they may be. As the sun set over the port of Palos de la Frontera, casting long shadows on the wooden docks, one man stood looking west. He was gazing beyond the known world, believing he could reach the edge of legend itself. The dream was finally in motion. The age of exploration had found its most relentless dreamer, and the greatest voyage in history was about to begin. The year is 1492. It's a pivotal moment for Spain. The Spanish crown has just triumphed in Granada, uniting the Iberian Peninsula under a single banner. The nation is reborn, and with it, a dream long dismissed by kings and scholars is about to be realized. In the small harbor town of Palos de la Frontera, 3 ships rock gently on the tide: the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. These aren't massive warships. They're modest trading vessels. But on this day, they are destined to become vessels of legend. Christopher Columbus stands on the dock, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He carries with him not just navigational charts, but a conviction as solid as faith itself. Remember, the top scholars of the day had called his plan pure folly. They argued the ocean was too vast, the world too wide. But for Columbus, the riches of the East were just a few weeks' sail to the west. On August 3rd, 1492, the anchors are raised. The air fills with the sounds of creaking wood, snapping sails, and the shouts of sailors. On the shore, crowds gather. Some cheer for the bold adventure, while others whisper prayers for the souls on board. Mothers weep for the sons they may never see again. As the ships drift away from the safety of land, the vast, unknown Atlantic swallows them. This ocean was a place of terror in the medieval imagination. Maps from the era often depicted sea monsters and dragons lurking at the edges of the world, where ships were said to simply vanish. But for Columbus and his crew of about 90 men, there was no turning back now. For weeks they sailed west, straight into the void. At first, spirits were high. The winds were favorable, the sea was calm. But Columbus was already playing a psychological game. He kept 2 separate logs, one detailing the true distance they traveled, and a second, false log that he showed the crew. This was his clever trick to keep morale up, underreporting their progress to make them feel like they weren't so dangerously far from home. But days bled into weeks, and the unbroken horizon never changed. The food began to rot, the fresh water grew stale and scarce, and a deep, gnawing fear began to spread through the crew. Sailors whispered that they had entered cursed waters, where the compass spun wildly and the stars themselves were betraying them. The crew grew restless. They begged Columbus to turn back. Whispers of mutiny became open threats. But Columbus, using a powerful mix of charismatic persuasion and iron-willed command, held them together. Every night, he reminded them of the promise that lay ahead: gold, glory, and a place in history. He appealed to their faith, declaring, "The hand of God guides us west." Then in late September, just as despair was reaching its peak, something changed. Strange signs began to appear in the water: a floating log, then green reeds, a small carved stick, and then a bird circling high above the masts. Hope, which had nearly died, was suddenly reignited. On the night of October 11th, the 3 ships sailed under a dark, moonless sky. Columbus stood on the deck of the Santa Maria, his eyes straining, peering into the blackness. Then, at around 2 a.m., a cry shattered the silence. From the lookout on the Pinta, a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana shouted the words that would echo through history: "Tierra, tierra, land, land." At dawn, they saw it, a beautiful, shimmering shoreline covered in lush green trees, bathed in the golden light of a new day. Columbus fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He raised the royal flag of Spain, planted it in the sand, and gave thanks to God. He was certain he had reached the Indies, maybe a remote island off the coast of Japan or China. But he was mistaken. He had, in fact, reached an island in what we now call the Bahamas, part of a vast continent completely unknown to Europeans. Stepping onto the sandy beach, he named the island San Salvador, Holy Savior. The native people who emerged from the trees to greet them, the Taino, watched these strange bearded men with peaceful curiosity. Their skin was bronzed, their lives woven into the rhythm of nature. They had never seen iron swords, never heard the thunder of a cannon, and never imagined a world existed beyond their shores. In his journal, Columbus described them as loving people without greed, noting they would make good servants. In his mind, he had found the people of Asia. For them, it was the arrival of beings who seemed to have come from the sea, or perhaps even the sky. This single moment, this first encounter on a quiet beach, marked the collision of 2 worlds. It was a beginning, but also an end. The voyage had succeeded, but its consequences would be far greater and far more complex than anyone on that shore could have ever imagined. The Taino believed the strangers had come from the heavens. The Europeans saw the islanders as the first subjects of a new Spanish empire. Columbus presented them with red caps, glass beads, and bells. The Taino responded with parrots, cotton, and gold trinkets, small hints of riches that would ignite Europe's hunger for conquest. Historians describe how Columbus noted the shimmering metal worn by the islanders and immediately asked where it came from. They pointed south to a land they called Cubanacan, and so began his journey deeper into the unknown. He sailed across turquoise waters to larger islands, Cuba and Hispaniola, which is present-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic. The landscape astonished him: dense jungles, towering mountains, and villages humming with life. Everywhere he went, he claimed the lands for Spain, planting crosses in the soil, still believing he was exploring the fringes of Asia. but beneath the beauty, challenges grew. On Christmas Day, 1492, his flagship, the Santa Maria, struck a reef and was lost. The wreck forced Columbus to make a bold decision. From the remains of the ship, he built a small fort, La Navidad, the first European settlement in the New World. He left behind 39 men, promising to return with supplies and more ships. In January 1493, after months of exploration, he turned back towards Spain. The Niña and Pinta sailed eastward, their holds filled with exotic goods, gold dust, strange plants, and several captured natives to present to the royal court. But the ocean was not done testing him. Fierce storms battered the ships as they crossed the Atlantic. Waves towered like walls, lightning split the sky. Columbus knelt in prayer, vowing to make a pilgrimage if he survived. At last, he reached Spain in March 1493, scarred by the sea but triumphant. He entered Barcelona as a hero. Bells rang, crowds cheered. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella received him with honor. Before them, he displayed parrots, gold ornaments, and the Taino captives, living proof of his success. To the monarchs, this was more than discovery. It was divine destiny. They named him Admiral of the Ocean Sea. Within months, preparations began for a second, much larger voyage aimed at colonization. Yet back across the Atlantic, the story was different. What began as discovery soon turned to domination. When Columbus returned, he found La Navidad reduced to ashes, his men killed in clashes with the Taino. He built a new colony, Isabella, but sickness, hunger, and rebellion followed. The gentle exchanges of that first voyage were replaced by greed, misunderstanding, and blood. Still, the machine of empire could not be stopped. In the decades that followed, fleets from Spain, Portugal, and later England and France sailed westward. They brought with them the Columbian Exchange, an unstoppable flow of life between two worlds. Corn, potatoes, and tomatoes sailed east to Europe. Horses, wheat, and cattle crossed west to the Americas, but so too did diseases, smallpox, influenza, and measles, which would devastate entire civilizations. Historians have called it the greatest biological exchange in history. Plants, animals, and human destinies were now intertwined across the oceans. Columbus himself would make 4 voyages in total. He explored the coasts of Central and South America, still convinced he was near Asia. But fame turned to controversy. Accusations of misrule, brutality, and failure to deliver the promised riches led to his arrest in chains. He died in 1506, not as the celebrated discoverer of a new world, but as a man misunderstood, believing to his last breath that he had reached the East. And yet his voyage had already lit the fuse of history. In its wake came explorers like Amerigo Vespucci, whose name would christen the continents, conquistadors who would topple mighty empires, and nations that would rise from conquest and colonization. Columbus's voyage did not end the old world. It connected it to a new one. From that connection came centuries of exchange, of culture, language, faith, and struggle. It would birth nations, ignite revolutions, and redefine what it meant to be human on a shared planet. The discovery of 1492 was not the end of one story. It was the beginning of every modern one. The sails of the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria have long vanished, but their wake still ripples through our time. A single voyage across an uncharted sea became the moment the world found itself, vast, diverse, and forever connected. More than 5 centuries later, the echoes of that voyage remain. The year 1492 stands as a turning point, the dawn of the modern age when maps were redrawn, worlds collided, and the horizon of human ambition grew limitless. This was the discovery of America, a story of courage and curiosity, of triumph and tragedy, a story that reminds us that the world we live in today began with a dream to sail beyond the edge of the known world. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you found this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. We'll see you next time.